My beloved child, your soulmate says. This is the confession I've been afraid to make, because it will change the way you see me forever. I have replayed these words in my mind more times than you could ever imagine, and every time I came close to telling you, something inside me pulled me back. Not because I stopped caring. Not because my feelings disappeared. The truth is almost the opposite. I became afraid of what would happen if you finally saw the part of me I have kept hidden behind silence, distance, pride, and those moments when I acted like I didn't care as much as I actually did. There is something I need you to understand before I say it. You were never as easy for me to forget as I pretended you were. I tried to convince myself that enough time would make everything quieter, but somehow, the smallest things kept bringing you back into my thoughts. A familiar song. A random place. A sentence someone said without knowing what it meant to me. And then there were those quiet moments when nobody was around and I could no longer distract myself from the question I had been avoiding: what if I had been completely wrong about you? And here is where my confession becomes harder, because I owe you the truth about something I never had the courage to admit. There were moments when I wanted to reach out to you so badly, but I stopped myself because I didn't know what your response would be. I wondered whether you had moved on emotionally, whether you had stopped believing in me, whether my silence had already convinced you that I never truly cared. And the thought of hearing that from you terrified me more than staying silent ever did. So I watched from a distance in my own way, carrying questions I never asked and answers I never received. I kept telling myself that maybe you were happier without me, maybe you had finally found peace, maybe I had missed my chance. But something inside me refused to accept that story completely. Because whenever I imagined you completely disappearing from my life, there was an ache I could not explain away. You became the person I compared other connections to without even realizing I was doing it. I noticed the difference in conversations. I noticed the difference in comfort. I noticed how rare it was to feel understood without having to explain every part of myself. And slowly, painfully, I began realizing that the thing I had been calling confusion was actually fear. I wasn't confused about how much you mattered. I was afraid of what admitting it would require from me. But there is one part of this confession that I have never said out loud, and this is the part that may completely change what you thought was happening between us. I was not always distant because I wanted distance. Sometimes I pulled away precisely because I felt too much and didn't know how to handle it. I saw the depth of what this connection could become, and instead of moving closer, I started questioning everything. What if I disappoint you? What if you discover the parts of me I struggle to accept myself? What if you expect honesty from me and I finally have nowhere left to hide? Those questions became louder than my courage. So I became guarded. I gave you less than I felt. I said less than I wanted to say. And perhaps the most painful part is that I may have made you believe you were the problem when the real struggle was happening inside me. You deserved clarity, but I gave you silence. You deserved reassurance, but I gave you uncertainty. You deserved to know what was happening in my heart, but I kept trying to translate my feelings into distance because distance felt safer than vulnerability. Yet even after all that, you remained somewhere in my mind. And lately, one thought has become impossible for me to ignore: if I keep hiding the truth because I am afraid of losing you, I may eventually lose you because I refuse to tell you the truth. So this is the confession I have been afraid to make. I still care more deeply than I have ever allowed myself to show, and a part of me has been hoping that the story between us was not finished even when my actions made it look that way. I don't know what you will think when you hear this. Maybe you will be angry. Maybe you will question why I waited so long. Maybe you will wonder why I allowed silence to speak for me when my heart was saying something completely different. And honestly, I understand those questions. But there is something else you need to know, because this is only the beginning of what I have been carrying. There is a specific moment I keep remembering, a moment when something you said or did made me realize just how deeply you had affected me. I never told you what happened inside me then. I never told you what I understood about you in that moment. And if I tell you now, you may finally understand why I became so different afterward. That is the part of my confession I have been protecting for far too long, and I'm finally ready to reveal what I realized about you. There is one memory I keep returning to, and I have never told you why it stayed with me. It wasn't some dramatic moment that everyone could notice. It was something small, almost ordinary, but something about it reached a place inside me that I had spent years keeping protected. I remember the way you made me feel seen without demanding anything from me. You didn't need to force a confession out of me. You didn't need to ask 100 questions. Somehow, your presence made it harder for me to hide from myself. And that frightened me. Because before you, I had become very good at controlling what people knew about me. I could smile when I was uncertain. I could act calm when I was overwhelmed. I could say, "I'm fine," when there were entire conversations happening inside my head. But with you, those defenses started becoming transparent. You noticed things I thought nobody noticed. You could sense when my words were different from what I actually felt. And instead of making me feel exposed, somehow you made me feel understood. That was the moment I began realizing that this connection was not something I could simply treat like every other connection in my life. You had reached a part of me I didn't know how to explain, and instead of admitting that, I became quieter. Then something happened that I still regret. I had an opportunity to be completely honest with you, and I chose the safer words instead. I remember thinking, say what you really feel. But another voice inside me immediately answered, what if everything changes after that? So I held back. I changed the subject. I acted more casual than I felt. Maybe you never realized how much I wanted to say in that moment. Maybe you walked away believing that I was unaffected. But the truth is, after you were gone, I replayed that conversation in my mind and wondered what might have happened if I had simply been brave. That became a pattern. I would feel something deeply, hesitate, hide it, and then later wonder why the distance between us kept growing. And the strangest part is that I sometimes blamed circumstances for a distance I helped create. I told myself that timing was complicated, that life was moving too quickly, that perhaps we were simply meant to take different paths for a while. But deep down, I knew there was another answer. I was scared that if I gave you the truth, you would hold it in your hands and have the power to decide what happened next. And I wasn't ready to surrender that control. I wanted you close enough to matter but far enough away that I could pretend I wasn't vulnerable. I know now how unfair that was. Here is what I wish I had understood sooner: love, connection, and genuine emotional attachment cannot be controlled by pretending they are smaller than they really are. The more I tried to minimize what I felt for you, the more obvious it became to me that I was fighting something real inside myself. I started noticing how often my thoughts returned to you during completely unrelated moments. I would accomplish something and instinctively want to tell you. I would experience something beautiful and wonder what you would say about it. I would hear an opinion that reminded me of one of our conversations and suddenly feel that familiar pull toward you again. And then came the realization that truly changed me. I wasn't missing an old version of you. I was missing the possibility of knowing you more deeply. I was missing the conversations we never had, the honesty we never reached, the moments that could have existed if I had stopped protecting myself. That realization was painful because it meant I could no longer blame the past. I had to look at my own choices. I had to admit that some of the distance between us was created by my fear of being emotionally exposed. And once I admitted that to myself, another truth became impossible to ignore. You may have thought I was waiting for you to make the first move, but that isn't the whole story. There were times I almost did it myself. I almost sent the message. I almost said the words. I almost broke the silence. More than once. But each time, I imagined every possible response except the one I secretly wanted. I imagined you rejecting the conversation. I imagined you telling me that you no longer cared. I imagined you saying that I had waited too long. And because I was afraid of hearing those words, I chose not to give you the chance to say anything at all. That is the confession behind the confession. I wasn't silent because you meant nothing. I was silent because you meant enough to make rejection feel unbearable. But I am beginning to understand something now. If I continue hiding behind that fear, I will never know what could have happened if I had simply trusted the truth. So I am finally admitting what I once refused to admit. I did not walk away emotionally as easily as I appeared to. And there is one final piece of this story I still haven't told you, the reason your absence affected me far more than I ever let you see. The truth became impossible to ignore on a day when I least expected it, because something completely ordinary suddenly reminded me of you, and for a moment, every excuse I had built collapsed. I realized I had been carrying your absence differently than I carried anyone else's. I could move through my day, laugh with people, stay busy, and convince everyone that everything was normal, but there was always a quiet place inside me where your name seemed to remain. And what surprised me most was that I wasn't simply remembering the moments we had shared. I was remembering the moments I had failed to create. The conversation I should have continued. The question I should have asked. The truth I should have spoken when I had the chance. That was when I finally understood why your silence could affect me so deeply. It wasn't because I expected you to always be there. It was because somewhere inside me, I had never completely accepted the idea that you might not be. I had treated your presence like something I could postpone appreciating until I was ready. I thought there would always be another opportunity to explain myself, another chance to tell you what I really felt, another moment when the timing would finally become perfect. But perfect timing never arrived. And suddenly, I had to confront the possibility that the person I was waiting to become brave for might eventually stop waiting for me. What I never told you is that your absence forced me to look at myself more honestly than your presence ever did. When you were there, I could keep pretending I had everything under control. When you became distant, I had nowhere to hide from my own thoughts. I began asking questions that made me uncomfortable. Why did I hesitate whenever things became emotionally real? Why did I become distant when I actually wanted closeness? Why did I sometimes act like I needed less from you when the truth was that I wanted to understand you more? And then came the question that shook me the most. What if I had been protecting myself from the very connection I secretly wanted? I realized I had confused emotional control with emotional strength. I thought strength meant never showing how deeply someone could affect me. I thought vulnerability would make me weaker. But when it came to you, hiding everything didn't make me stronger. It only made me harder to understand. You couldn't read what I refused to show you. You couldn't respond to feelings I disguised. And perhaps you started believing that my silence was an answer. That realization hurt because I knew you deserved better than guessing what I meant. You should never have had to decode me. And then came the part one never expected. I started imagining what I would say if I ever got one completely honest conversation with you. At first, I thought I would explain everything. I would tell you why I became distant, why I hesitated, why I sometimes seemed emotionally unavailable when I was actually overwhelmed by what I felt. But the more I imagined that conversation, the more I realized explanations were not the most important thing. The most important thing was honesty. I wanted to tell you that you mattered to me in ways I had never properly acknowledged. I wanted to tell you that some of my coldest moments were not proof that I felt nothing. They were moments when I didn't know how to manage everything I was feeling. I wanted to tell you that I noticed more than I admitted. I remembered more than I showed. And I cared more than my behavior ever communicated. But there was one sentence I kept getting stuck on. Every time I reached that sentence in my mind, would stop. Because saying it meant admitting something I had spent so long denying. It meant giving up the comfortable story that I was simply fine without you. It meant acknowledging that there was still a part of my heart waiting for an answer, not necessarily from you, but from the truth itself. And now I need you to understand why this confession has taken so long. I wasn't waiting because I didn't know what I felt. I was waiting because I knew exactly what I felt, and I was terrified that saying it would make everything real. Once spoken, the truth could no longer be hidden behind silence, timing, distance, or excuses. You would finally know that I had not forgotten you the way I sometimes pretended. You would know that I had questioned my own decisions. You would know that there were nights when I wondered whether I had pushed away someone I should have fought harder to understand. And most importantly, you would know that somewhere along the way, you became more than a passing chapter in my life. You became a question I never finished answering. But there is something even deeper I have not confessed yet. I discovered that the reason I kept thinking about you wasn't only because I missed you. It was because I finally understood what your presence had awakened inside me, and once I tell you what that was, you may finally understand why I have been afraid to make this confession at all. The moment I finally understood what you had awakened inside me, everything I had been calling confusion suddenly became clear. It wasn't simply that I missed your voice, your presence, or the familiar feeling of having you somewhere within reach. I missed the version of myself that appeared whenever I felt truly understood by you. Around you, I didn't feel like I had to perform, impress, or constantly prove that I had everything figured out. And that scared me because I had spent so much time building an identity around being emotionally independent. I told myself I didn't need anyone to understand every hidden part of me. Then you came along and somehow made me want exactly that. You made me want to be known completely, not just admired from a distance. You made me want conversations that went beyond the surface. You made me want to stop pretending that I could walk away from something meaningful without feeling anything. That realization changed the way I looked back at everything between us. Suddenly, certain memories had a different meaning. Certain silences had a different meaning. Even the moments when I seemed distracted or distant had a truth underneath them that I never allowed you to see. I wasn't becoming less attached. I was becoming more aware of how deeply this connection was affecting me, and instead of moving toward you, I instinctively stepped backward. But there is something else I need to confess, because this is where I know I failed you emotionally. I sometimes expected you to understand what I could not bring myself to say. I wanted you to notice the things I was too afraid to explain. I wanted you to recognize that behind certain short replies, there was a much longer conversation happening inside my mind. I wanted you to know that when I disappeared into my own thoughts, it didn't always mean I was losing interest. Sometimes I was trying to understand why you mattered so much. But expecting you to read what I refused to communicate was unfair. You should never have been responsible for translating my silence. If I cared, I should have shown it. If I was confused, I should have explained it. If I was afraid, I should have trusted you enough to admit it. Instead, I gave you pieces and expected you to understand the whole picture. And maybe that is why I have been carrying so much regret. Not because I know exactly how everything would have turned out if I had been honest, but because I know I never gave the truth a fair chance to speak. I protected myself from the possibility of rejection, but in doing so, I also protected myself from the possibility of something beautiful becoming real. Then came the realization that I could no longer escape. I didn't just want you to remember me. I wanted you to understand me. There is a huge difference between those two things. Being remembered is easy. Someone can remember your face, your voice, your habits, the moments you shared. But being understood means someone knows why you became quiet, why you hesitate, why certain things affect you more than you admit. And when I thought about you, I realized I wanted you to understand the person behind every confusing moment. I wanted you to know that I wasn't always distant because I didn't care. Sometimes I was distant because I cared and didn't know what to do with it. I wanted you to know that when I acted unaffected, there were moments when I was anything but unaffected. I wanted you to know that some of my strongest attempts to move forward were interrupted by memories of what we never finished saying to each other. And perhaps the strangest part is that I don't even know when you became this important to me. There wasn't one single day when I decided you mattered. It happened gradually, quietly, through dozens of tiny moments I didn't recognize until they were already part of me. By the time I understood it, your absence had already become something I noticed. So here I am, finally standing at the edge of the truth I kept avoiding. I have replayed the past enough times to know that I cannot change what I failed to say. I cannot rewrite the moments when I chose silence. I cannot go back and give you the reassurance I should have given you then. But I can finally admit what I have been too proud, too uncertain, or too afraid to say, I did not stop caring just because I stopped showing it. And if you ever wondered whether you imagined the depth of this connection, I want you to know that you didn't. I felt it too. I just didn't know how to carry something that mattered this much without becoming afraid of losing it. But there is still one truth I have been holding behind all of this, the truth that explains why, despite everything, a part of me still believes our story deserves one honest conversation. And when I finally tell you what I realized about that possibility, you may understand why this confession has been waiting for so long.